Welcome to the Humanist Freedoms podcast by Humanist Heritage Canada. We share stories and perspectives from Canada's ongoing humanist heritage. You can find us online at www.humanistfreedoms.com or www.humanistheritagecanada.ca, where you may find the Humanist Freedoms news blog. We share news, information, and stories about what we call contemporary applied humanism. It's humanism in action. Humanist Heritage Canada is our new initiative to document and share the stories of Canada's rich humanist heritage. Four, the Ecological Revolution. The British Ecological Society describes ecology as the study of distribution and abundance of organisms, the interaction between organisms, the interaction between organisms and their environment, and structure and function of ecosystems. The Canadian Society for Ecology and Evolution broadens the discipline to include, quite naturally, the study of evolution. But ecology now reaches far beyond the biosphere. There are now social, environmental, political, and economic ecosystems, and they all interact. The early researchers in the field probably had no idea they were ushering in a revolution in the way we think about the world. No longer do we see single individual or separate species and isolated landscapes. We experience all living things as relating to each other in such countless complex global interactions that we have come to see the Earth, as James Lovelock has argued, as a single breathing organism he calls Gaia. It encompasses the flora and fauna as well as the metals and minerals of our planet in their entirety, including us. Poets have always known this when Blake writes, "To see a world in a grain of sand, and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour," from Auguries of Innocence. He conjures up a mystical view of the universe in which everything relates to everything else. Remove the archaic religious components, and you have a vision of the universe that is wholly in accord with the most advanced insights of modern science. It extends the idea of ecosystems beyond biological phenomena to include the inorganic world. Both the macrocosm and the microcosm are composed of mass and energy that came into being when the first protons, electrons, and neutrons began to interact in the Big Bang 13.79 billion years ago. This singularity initiated an evolutionary process that expanded into hydrogen, helium, and lithium into a cosmic ecosystem where gigantic supernovae hurled the elements essential for the formation of stars and galaxies across space, and triggered here on Earth, as well as, I'm sure, on millions of other planets, throughout this still rapidly expanding universe, the processes we call life. This magnificent and mysterious spectacle can thus be seen as ecology in action. What Albert Einstein's astrophysics and Niels Bohr's quantum physics describe in a world in which everything is in relationship with everything else, constituting an existential project in which energy and mass interact perpetually to make the world what it is or what it appears to be, a vast ecosystem in constant flux, forever rearranging itself according to the laws of nature and in response to the impact of the forces they encounter. The complexities of this cosmological drama are mind-boggling, and we, who are both actors in and spectators of it, have only just begun to understand them. In time, they must and will become part of a new consciousness if intelligent life is to survive the impact of human folly, greed, and selfishness. This conference is one of a growing number of manifestations and protests around the world that signifies an awakening. The anthropocentric way we conduct ourselves is affecting our environmental ecosystems so negatively as to unleash grim disasters globally that may end with us destroying our own habitat. It is because of our failure to understand the world as a global web of interactions between participants with equal claims that we are facing an abyss today. The assumption of Western religions that we humans are creatures with an immortal soul and the world exists for our benefit may be flattering to our egos, but the hubris it embodies has put us on a path to self-destruction. The heedless pursuit of our pleasure, our comfort, our happiness, and our ceaseless craving for instant gratification, regardless of other creatures, is destroying the very conditions on which we depend for our survival. Our forests, the Earth's lungs, are being brutally demolished by chainsaw and fire. Our rivers and oceans are dying from industrial pollution and garbage, which are killing marine life around the world. Global warming is engendering increasingly extreme weather conditions, producing catastrophic storms, floods, droughts, fires. The polar ice caps are melting and will eventually put much of the civilized world underwater. In Canada, global warming seems to be proceeding twice as fast as anywhere else. It is rapidly destroying the habitats of Indigenous people, and I have just arrived from Canada's capital, which is suffering, for the third year in a row, unprecedented, catastrophic flooding along the Ottawa River in Ontario and Quebec. The dramatic changes to our ecosystem are not only threatening our own survival, they have also triggered a mass extinction equal to that caused by an asteroid 65 million years ago that wiped out the dinosaurs, along with 76% of all creatures. Almost daily, new studies are added to the growing literature bearing witness to the rapid and frightening degradation of our planet. It is the logical conclusion to the history of a species that considers itself superior to all other creatures, and for whom the planet has become a private fiefdom to use or abuse at will. We may already have passed the point of no return, but at the very least it's clear that time to avoid an apocalypse is running out. William R. Catton Jr. subtitled his book Overshoot, The Ecological Basis of Revolutionary Change. He demonstrates that the suicidal course we are embarked on is actually quite common in nature. It is the inevitable fate of species which an evolutionary fluke has endowed with some special quality that made them particularly successful in the struggle for survival, or for whom natural events have opened up large sources of food, enabling them to expand their population. Their very success inevitably induces them to overshoot the limits of sustainable survival. Their success is their undoing. This cyclical pattern ominously fits Homo sapiens. A little over 10,000 years ago, we exchanged the nomadic hunter-gatherer life for a sedentary one of the farmer, growing our own food and raising our own cattle. Food supplies became virtually unlimited, and the human population grew accordingly. That opened a road, the end of which our ancestors could not have anticipated. Tiny hamlets gradually expanded to today's megalopolises. The steady increase in numbers led to a growing complexity of urban life. Civilization was born, and thanks to progress in the medical sciences, population growth is now exponential and no longer sustainable. To see history as a cyclical process is an acknowledgement that, as complex interactive systems, civilizations are organic entities, ecosystems born to flourish and then to perish. From the ashes arise new civilization. Jean-Baptiste Vico, one of the most eminent cyclical historians, puts it this way: the nature of peoples is first crude, then severe, then benign, then delicate, and finally dissolute. Applying this pattern, it is clear that our own civilization has reached its nadir. In a universe ruled by the law of entropy, this is the inescapable pattern of all things. Nations, individuals, species, civilizations all come and go in a chain of endless transformations. We happen to be living through the demise of Western civilization, which the poet William Butler Yeats sees turning and turning in the widening gyre. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. From The Second Coming. No one has expressed our present crisis more eloquently and more presciently. Yeats wrote these lines 100 years ago, and he ends the poem wondering about the nature of the new civilization to be born. Consciousness and mindfulness are too magnificent an achievement by a bunch of subatomic particles to fall victim to the stupidity of a bunch of arrogant, ignorant animals in suit and tie. So there is hope. Western civilization may be doomed, but the human species may continue to evolve. Our unique ability to think enables us to understand ecological causes and effects and act accordingly. The poet knows life will go on, with or without us, depending on our willingness to accept responsibility for the world and abandon the current path of self-destruction. We need not continue to race into the abyss. If, for example, we were to drastically reduce our burning of fossil fuels today, global warming would start to slow down tomorrow, eventually come to a stop and go into the reverse. So why don't we? Because the Neolithic Revolution bestowed on us two blessings, each of which has become a curse. The first is agriculture. It brought us seemingly unlimited food resources and with it a population explosion. There are now 8 billion of us, and our numbers are increasing by 82 million annually. The need to feed so many has all but exhausted the environment and stressed society to breaking point globally. A farmer must stay put to raise crops and cattle, so he builds a permanent home for himself and his family, and that invites the acquisition of possessions. The second Neolithic blessing. Nomads can own no more than they can carry, but when you settle down in a permanent home, you quite naturally fill it with practical things like tables and chairs. To satisfy your aesthetic sense, you add things to embellish your home. Vanity and ambition soon have you competing with your neighbors for larger houses, better furniture, more enjoyable luxuries, etc. And voila, the consumer society is born. Introduce money into this process and you're headed for disaster. As far as physical possessions are concerned, how many cars, settees, or houses do you wish to own, and where do you put them? But money, especially in our digital age, is just a number entered in an account, and the amount you can store there is infinite. So when our ancestors exchanged foraging for farming, they embarked on the road not only to a population explosion, but also to consumerism and capitalism, a lethal combination. Today we live with the results. The majority of humans live in poverty while a few acquire fairy tale wealth. According to Oxfam, the top 8 billionaires control the same financial resources as the poorest half of the world population, and the gulf between the rich and poor continues to grow. Just imagine the situation concretely. The richest man on earth today is Elon Musk with a wealth of $241 billion. Because of the investments of the top richest men, the order changes constantly. But to get a sense of the depravity of the situation, it helps to remember that Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, currently the second richest man in the world, who controls as much money as 500 million of the world's poor, earns over $200,000 in a minute. Shall I go on? This situation is already a catastrophic, and there is no glory in it. Clearly, we don't act effectively to avert the disasters of global warming and the collapse of our ecosystem because politics is now conducted not by political parties but by rich industrialists who finance them. So long as the 1%, as the hyper wealthy are called in the USA, can grow ever richer and the rest of us correspondingly poorer, why should they change a system they can control and that benefits them hugely? They don't care that they are supporting an unsustainable ecosystem, perhaps because they believe their wealth will enable them to escape the consequences of a global collapse. For all we know, they may be building castles underground or underwater where they plan to carry on their nefarious financial games. Meanwhile, the remaining 99% of the world population is beginning to wake up. All over the world, school children are opting not to go to school on Fridays and instead protest the inertia of their governments on environmental issues. They know their future is at stake. And we must support their demand that we reduce our carbon footprint. They understand the need for alternative, sustainable sources of energy, but these alone cannot satisfy our current energy needs. It is crucial that we learn to lower our energy demands, restrain our insatiable appetite for travel, and forego some of our excessive indulgences in energy-guzzling luxuries. May today's youngsters grow up to create a world where sustainable retrenchment replaces unsustainable growth. To take the practical steps necessary to change course, we must take back the power and the right to govern our lives. It means creating truly democratic administrations in place of the governments that now primarily serve the financial interests of international corporations and the 1%. An authentic democratic ecosystem is one where all relationships are based on the equality of people and where the earth's bounty and the fruit of our labors are equitably shared by all. To achieve it, we need to face up to what we have allowed to happen to us. It calls for intelligent and determined leadership. And I'm afraid the current crop of political and media leadership is, for the most part, woefully inadequate to the task. It requires nothing less than a vision of the opportunities the natural ecosystem offers and the limits it imposes. All creatures and species play their part in this infinitely interactive cross-hatching of organisms, and none occupies any privileged position or serves any exalted purpose. Yes, humankind is special and unique, but so are bats and whales. While they have developed their uniqueness to enjoy eons of living on this planet, the unfoldment of our unique human qualities has triggered a mass extinction which may well include us, in which case we'll hold the record for the most short-lived and most murderous creature on the planet. It'd be the logical conclusion of our delusion that we are the crowning glory of creation. We must disabuse ourselves of such criminal vanity. Our grandeur is the function of our delusion that humanity is the measure of all things. I used to play a mind game with my students to bring home the point. Imagine we could conduct a poll in which all creatures on land, in the sea, and in the air were asked to choose one species of animal they would like to see disappear from the face of the earth. Which species do you think would get the biggest vote? The embarrassed smile with which this proposition was always received suggests that deep down we know very well how obscenely we have abused the improbable privilege to be alive. If we are to survive this global crisis, we must learn to think ecologically and to act in the interests not just of ourselves and our fellow humans, but also those of all other fellow creatures on Earth and the vegetation on which we depend. And we must act to protect and enhance not only today's web of life, but tomorrow's as well. Nietzsche's enriched our catalogue of virtues by one he called Fernstenliebe, love of who are far away, which, as distinct from Nächstenliebe, love of those next to us, i.e., our neighbors, calls for a love of the future, of the generations of human and non-human creatures to come. This virtue is of crucial importance today because whatever sacrifices we make save our environment will benefit not us, but future generations. Perhaps it all starts with education, true education. Today's educational institutions have become vocational training centers at best, promoters of the unsustainable status quo at worst. Of course, we need engineers, doctors, mechanics, nurses, etc., and they must be trained. But education is more than acquiring skills for a well-paying job. It is a journey of the mind that should take us through the history not only of our own species, but of life itself and indeed of the cosmos. After all, that's what life is, a quest for understanding, the mystery at the heart of things. Such a quest cherishes above all else freedom, beauty, and truth. Responsible education must not only train our reasoning faculties, but also, and more importantly, nurture and refine our emotions and our imagination. Only the mature interaction of these three human faculties can guide us towards peace, fulfillment, and happiness. And that is where the arts enter the picture. We are not the zoon logikon of Aristotle or the animal rationale of scholastic philosophy. For sure, we are experts at cerebral speculation and articulation, but when it comes to action, we are an animal emotional, as the current suicidal behavior of our species demonstrates. Only someone clinically insane would joyfully act in a manner contrary to his or her desired objective, but that's what the vast majority of people and of nations are doing today. It's not rational arguments that motivate us, but our emotions, and they are composed and conducted by the oldest part of our brain, the limbic system. We employ our reasoning faculties mostly to rationalize post hoc what we have done. It is sobering to remember that the human genome differs from that of chimpanzees by only 1.2%. In other words, we are 98.8% animal, and like animals, we are driven by instinct and emotion. Our adrenaline system, which catapults us into instant postures of defense and aggression when faced with concrete threat, remains inert to rational arguments and threats of catastrophes projected to overwhelm us in the future. Only when the inhabitants of the world cities are wading water above their hips will the adrenaline response be triggered in the citizenry, and then it'll be too late to arrest climate change. It is the arts that address us in the totality of our being, and poetry is the mother of all arts because it embraces painting, music, and language. Its unique combination of images, rhythms, and illusions trigger a response from our whole being. As the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas famously put it in a talk at MIT, a few words of a kind. Poetry is what in a poem makes you laugh, cry, prickle, be silent, makes your toenails twinkle, makes you want to do this or that or nothing, makes you know that you are alone in the unknown world, that your bliss and suffering is forever shared and forever all your own. The poet's use of metaphor, simile, symbol, metonymy, onomatopoeia, and hyperbole are some of the devices calculated to evoke an experience that engages the reader at all levels. In vicariously experiencing how the heterogeneous elements interrelate, the reader becomes whole. The poet achieves this by inducing the reader to insert his or her own personal thoughts, emotions, memories, and histories into the poem. Thus, the reader and the poem become one, and the insights of the one become the discernment of the other. A poem does not argue, it embodies truth. Reading it means coming to know viscerally the world's ambiguities, contradictions, and paradoxes, and thereby become motivated to act upon them. Let me conclude with a caveat. Noble thoughts and sound arguments do not as much make good poetry. They are the hallmark of sermons, and if you feel compelled to preach sermons, get yourself a pulpit. The poet merely conjures up the world as he sees it, as honestly and precisely as he can. As Hamlet explains to his players, their function is to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature, to show the very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. The bard understood the need to respect the freedom of his audience and his readers to make their own decisions. The mirror deprives them of their innocence by showing them what is happening in the world, and it demands response. Whatever they decide to do or not to do is up to them, but their action or inaction makes them complicit in the state of the world. We conclude appropriately that the mirror of imaginative literature challenges us to assume our true humanity and thereby motivates us to act in the light of our new insights into a revolutionary ecology. The keynote address and poetry reading by Henry Beissel at the Marburg International Festival, echoing ecology's interdisciplinary perspectives in Canadian studies. 5. The Second Humanist Revolution, Eco-Humanism. Humanism is a philosophical and literary movement that changed the face of the world. Born in late 14th and early 15th century Italy as a protest against the dogmatic absolutism of medieval Catholicism, it quickly spread across Europe and created the intellectual conditions for the Renaissance, thus launching the modern age. The Middle Ages saw the social order on earth as an imperfect replica of the order of heaven, a hierarchy centered on God, who had assigned, just as in heaven, his angels and seraphim, everyone on earth his or her place on the ladder of social rank, from the king at the top to the poor, unlettered, and bondage peasants and laborers at the bottom. It was a static worldview, convenient and flattering to those enjoying power and privilege, but a life sentence of slavery for the majority of people. This social structure was built on an equally confining doctrinaire intellectual base. The fall of Adam and Eve, the Catholic Church taught, had so corrupted human senses and the human mind as to render them incapable of arriving at reliable true insights into the nature of things without divine guidance. All knowledge and truth had their source in God and were therefore revelatory, not the fruit of human reason and observation. But the human spirit will not, in the long run, be suppressed, and everything is in constant flux and must change. Every system of thought and action contains the seeds of its own transcendence. Behind the transparently rigid dogmatic exterior of medieval Catholicism, forces were at work to undermine it. Theological disputes grappling with doctrinal contradictions eventually reasserted the ability of the human mind to discover truth by observation and thought, though only under the guidance and ultimate authority of the Church. If the humanist revolution was thus prepared by the soul-searching debates within the fortress of medieval faith, the humanist thinkers of the 14th and 15th centuries, who rose in revolt against the repressive dominance of the Church, nevertheless broke upon the scene with the force of a volcanic eruption. Their call was to the liberation of human beings and of the human spirit. They went back to the philosophers of antiquity and, after extricating their work from the misrepresentations of scholastic spin-doctors, recovered from the classical Greek and Roman texts the ideas of human freedom, of the worth of the individual, of democratic government, and of scientific and intellectual inquiry after truth and the nature of things. The consequence of this revolution in our ideas about ourselves and the world are difficult to exaggerate. It was as though a new and brilliant light had burst upon a gloomy darkness. Renaissance paintings conveys a visceral sense of the startling illumination of the world. The light resounds with the cry for freedom, freedom from repression by dogma, by self-appointed authority, by the warlords of church and state. Humanism set in motion the slow, tumultuous march towards democracy. It opened doors and windows to scientific inquiry and promoted the technological application of its insights. It liberated education from stifling traditions and established the study of the liberal arts as the true path to self-realization. The arts took a dramatic turn away from the artificialities of myth, legend, and hagiography. The lives of real human beings became the subject for writers and painters. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales embodies the pilgrimage of the mind from a long winter to its rebirth in spring. Nor was it any accident that perspective in painting was a Renaissance innovation. True knowledge, true understanding, the humanists argued, depended on seeing objects, individuals, events, ideas in their proper time and place. Thus, history was restored as an important component of the human quest. And finally, by rejecting the scriptural love of money is the root of all evil, and recognizing money not only as a necessary means of exchange, but as a legitimate means of social advancement, the humanists even set the study and application of economics on course. Humanism was not in its inception anti-religious. Most of the early humanist thinkers were devout Christians, but they opposed the tyranny of the Catholic Church and its interpretation of the Bible with its depressing doctrine of the world as a valley of tears and human life as a path of suffering to atone for some imagined original sin and hope for a better life in the hereafter. They insisted that God had endowed human beings with intelligence and a free will so that they should exercise them. Only later, when Protestantism, with its obsessive Puritanism, proved itself as repressive as the Roman Church, and it became clear that the God manifest in the Bible was irreconcilable with the world as it gradually revealed itself to the disciplined inquiry of the human mind, did humanism turn away from all forms of institutionalized religion. Pico della Mirandola, in his Oration on the Dignity of Man, still puts what I consider to be the first humanist manifesto in the mouth of God. I have given you, Adam, neither a predetermined place nor a particular aspect, nor any special prerogatives in order that you may take and possess these through your own decision and choice. The limitations on the nature of other creatures are contained within my prescribed laws. You shall determine your own nature without restraint from any barrier by means of the freedom to whose power I have entrusted you. I have placed you at the center of the world so that from that point you might see better what is in the world. I have made you so that, like a free and sovereign artificer, you might mold and fashion yourself into that form you yourself have chosen. This heretical declaration must have struck the Europe of its time like a cannon shot in the middle of a Gregorian chant. With one stroke of the mind, God had been removed from the center of the world and replaced by man. The discovery of America and Copernicus' heliocentric system of the planets, Newton's law of physics, and Darwin's discovery of the evolutionary process in nature, the works of Shakespeare, the Reformation, capitalism, democracy, communism, existentialism, atheism, feminism, all have their origin in the giant step that constitutes the first humanist revolution. The shift from God-centered to a man-centered universe was a swing of the pendulum from one extreme to another. It was a necessary step in the history of our species, but like all extremes, it was bound to end up undermining the very foundations of the New World Order it set out to create. Everything implies its opposite, and to the same extent. The conviction that humanity is the creator of its own world, in effect, the deification of man, has brought upon us a crisis of such catastrophic proportions that it now rivals the Cretaceous terminal cataclysm around 67 million years ago, when all life forms weighing more than 25 kilograms became extinct, and the rest was radically decimated. The current one, which is our own making, has the potential of putting an end to the human species itself, just as the Cretaceous extinction wiped out the dinosaur. The complete freedom we reach for has made us prisoners of our own technological achievements. It is time for the second humanist revolution to restore a larger perspective to our understanding of the world we inhabit and our place in it. Reason and its disciplined application to observation and experiment, on which we rest as our case as humanists, demands no less of us. John Gray in Straw Dogs attacks humanists as merely the inheritors of the Christian belief in the superiority of human beings over all other forms of life and in their ability to be masters of their own destiny. This is a catchy opening to an otherwise insightful and challenging study of what it means to be human. But its attempt to dismiss humanism as just another form of anthropocentric religion is simplistic, erroneous, and ignorant of the diversity and complexity of modern humanist thought, an unfortunate exercise in shadowboxing. However, such a misreading is inherent in the origins of humanism and in its name. After all, Pico della Mirandola does claim that we, unlike the other creatures, are free and sovereign artificers who take and possess our place in the world and fashion ourselves by our own decision and choice, without restraint from any barrier. This is a secular restatement of the Christian view of the supremacy of man, and I dare say many humanists still harbor such notions, since a commitment to human self-determination by the power of reason is central to their philosophy. In the absence of any clear statement to the contrary, outsiders can be forgiven if they see humanists in this anthropocentric light. The fact is that the rigorous, rational pursuit of knowledge and truth which humanism itself launched has, ironically, brought us not full but half circle round to a position that negates some of the original humanist assumptions. And we must now summon the courage to confront this second revolution in our ideas. The seeds for the reversal of our view of humanity's importance were inherent in the self-aggrandizement. As Pico della Mirandola placed man at the center of the world, the new astronomy removed the planet Earth from the center of the solar system, eventually the solar system far from any imaginable center of the universe, thereby effectively undercutting any claim to human supremacy. From the beginning, the disinterested pursuit of the truth about the world we live in was at odds with the assumptions on which we based our scientific research. Inevitably, the gap grew and eventually it became unbridgeable. The turning point came in the 19th century with Darwin's epoch-making work in evolutionary biology. At first, the demonstration that natural selection had led to the emergence of the human species seemed to confirm the idea that Homo sapiens constituted the pinnacle of the evolution of life, its supreme achievement. It took time for the implications of Darwin's discoveries to be fully understood. Being the last to arrive on the scene doesn't mean you're the focus of the event. Far from supporting any notion of human supremacy in the order of nature, evolution clearly argues both the randomness and the transience of our appearance on this planet. Had the Cretaceous comet not cleared the decks for a luxuriant mammalian boom, we would not be here to talk about it. Changing habitats and adaptation to them, mutation and natural selection, these alone determine the coming and going of species. And since the laws that govern the operations of energy and mass guarantee constant changes in the environment, it is a foregone conclusion that they will eventually create conditions that will replace human with some other animal kind. It is only a question of time. So ironically, at the same time Nietzsche declared the Christian idea of God dead, Darwin declared the Christian humanist idea of man dead. His discoveries allowed for no teleological interpretations of the evolution of life. Instead, they proved that nothing necessitated the emergence of humanity and nothing would prevent its demise. With this blow to the human ego, an atmosphere of doom descended upon Central Europe at the end of the 19th century. The anti-hero was born, and the two wars that devastated the 20th century can be seen as a form of existential revolt, a desperate attempt to prove that the most powerful are the fittest and that the fittest survive. It took the killing of untold millions of human beings for the realization to begin to dawn that the paths of power and pride leads into the abyss. Today, we are facing that abyss. The assumption that the world exists for our benefit has resulted in the devastation of the entire planet. The heedless pursuit of our pleasures, our comforts, our happiness, and our ceaseless gratification regardless of the other creatures is destroying the very conditions on which we depend for our survival. Our forests, the Earth's lungs, are being brutally amputated by the axe and the chainsaw. Our rivers and oceans are dying from industrial pollution, which is spreading diseases around the world. Global warming is engendering increasingly extreme weather conditions, producing catastrophic storms, floods, droughts, fires. The polar ice caps are melting and will put much of the civilized world underwater within this century. The biosphere is undergoing a mass extinction, except for its human population, which has reached 8 billion and is increasing by 200,000 every day. The majority of humans live in an abject poverty now, while few acquire fairy tale wealth, and the gulf between them continues to grow. The supply of oil necessary to meet vital energy needs has peaked and will soon dry up, along with many other resources of the earth we have plundered to the point of exhaustion. This partial catalogue of catastrophic developments is not the product of the raving mind of some pessimistic misanthrope. It is quite on the contrary based on research and reason, and lists the consequences of a heedless, self-centered mega-optimism and unprecedented human hubris. Almost daily, new studies are added to the growing literature bearing witness to the rapid and frightening degradation of our environment. For those who understand the implications, they add up to nothing less than the apocalypse, and time is running out. If we are to be spared a terrible final curtain to the human tragicomedy, we must now, and first of all, recognize that the impending disaster is of our own making. It is the logical conclusion to the history of a species that not only considers itself superior to all others creatures, but thinks the world exists for its sole benefit, as its own private fiefdom, and that sees itself as nature's supreme achievement, glorious, free, and immortal. William R. Catton, Jr., in his study Overshoot, shows that the suicidal courses we are embarked on is common in nature. It is the inevitable fate of species, and evolutionary fluke is endowed with some special quality that made them particularly successful in the struggle for survival. Their very success induces them to overshoot the limits of sustainable survival, deconstruct their habitat. In fact, their success is their undoing. That pattern ominously fits Homo sapiens. So perhaps we are simply acting out the laws of nature, but our species is unique for its ability to think, to abstract, and to make predictions. That in turn enables us to adjust our actions to bring about specific events or to prevent them from occurring. In other words, we need not continue marching into self-destruction. We have, theoretically, the necessary level of awareness and the freedom of action to change course for a more sustainable future. To effect that change requires a second humanist revolution. Just as the first humanist revolution removed God from the center of the world and replaced him with man, so we must now move man and replace him with life itself. We must now apply the very perspective the Renaissance humanists recovered for the history of humankind to the history of life. What emerges is an intricate web that has evolved over billions of years. All creatures and species play their part in this infinitely interactive cross-hatching of organisms, and none occupies any privileged position or serves any exalted purpose. Yes, humankind is special and unique, but so are bats and cockroaches. While they have developed their uniqueness to enjoy eons of living on this planet, the unfolding of our unique qualities has triggered a mass extinction of which we may well be the victims ourselves. If we manage to self-destruct in this or the next century, we may well hold the record for the most short-lived and murderous creature on this planet ever. Our grandeur is solely the function of our own delusion that humanity is the measure of all things. Having humbly accepted our place on this web of life, transitory as all other species and on an equal footing with them, no better than bats or cockroaches, the next step in the second humanist revolution is to act accordingly. That means to act in a manner that will not inflict injury, suffering, or death unnecessarily on any of the creatures with whom we share the planet, but instead to act to maintain and foster the well-being and diversity of the web of life. The practical implications of such a commitment call for nothing less than a complete reorientation of our individual lives and a complete overhaul of our social institutions and their activities. If we are to survive the current globalist crisis, we must all become eco-humanists. We must act in the interests not just of ourselves and our neighbors, but also those of all fellow humans on the planet, and indeed of all fellow creatures. Indeed, we must act to protect and enhance not only today's web of life, but tomorrow's as well. If life is to have any meaning at all, surely it has to be for each creature to bring to utmost expression its own unique characteristics within the limits nature has staked out for us all. Eco-humanism is the next logical step in the evolution of human mind. What that entails in practical terms is radical and all-encompassing. We must learn to content ourselves with a more modest mode of living, reduce our expectations and demands on the world around us. This involves learning to enjoy who we are rather than revel in what we possess. We must dramatically cut back the burning of fossil fuels and the rape of the Earth's resources. Lowering population levels is crucial, as the continued population explosion has already far overshot the carrying capacity of the Earth. It is essential that we develop alternative, sustainable sources of energy, but these can never satisfy our current energy needs. We must lower our energy demands, restrain our insatiable appetite for travel, forego some of our excessive indulgences in energy-guzzling luxuries. What we need is sustainable retrenchment instead of sustainable growth. Either we commit to it voluntarily, or we will soon be forced upon us. We must also take back the power and the right to govern our own lives by creating truly democratic administrations in place of the governments that now primarily serve the financial interests of corporations and of the few. We must eliminate poverty and establish a more equitable, more just distribution of the Earth's bounty. It all starts with education, true education. Today's educational institutions have become vocational training centers at best, promoters of the economically criminal status quo at worst. We forget at our cost that education is more than acquiring skills for a well-paying job or being indoctrinated in the disgraceful art of being politically correct. It is a journey of the mind that should take us through the history not only of our own species, but of life itself, and indeed of the cosmos. It is a permanent quest for understanding and knowledge, and cherishes above all else freedom, beauty, and truth. It must not only train our reasoning faculties, but also, and more importantly, nurture and refine our emotions and our imagination. Only the mature interaction of these three human faculties can guide us towards peace, fulfillment, and happiness. The first humanists understood that a true education must focus on the liberal arts. The values by which we choose to live our lives are motivated by our emotions and conceived in the imagination. Reason supplies the tool with which to implement them. Poetry, music, painting, fiction, along with history and philosophy, these are the tutors and custodians of the imagination and of our emotions. That's how eco-humanism reaffirms the principles that launched the first humanist revolution. Our children need to be exposed to and instructed in them from the start, not as some subsidiary activity, but as part of the mainstay of their educational experience. Only on that path will they acquire the humility, compassion, and understanding that form the foundation for any possible restoration of the web of life on our planet that will include a viable future for the human species along with all other fellow creatures. Should you wish to obtain a copy of Henry Beissel's Catastrophic Glory, you can inquire at humanistfreedoms@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to pass your inquiry along. Thank you for taking time to visit the Humanist Freedoms podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed putting the show together. If you liked this or any episode of the podcast, please consider subscribing or leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a humanist story idea, or feedback to share, you can reach us at humanistfreedoms@gmail.com.